recording, and also we'll be publishing to the Out of Code YouTube channel. Aaron, are you ready? Yes, Aaron, are you ready? Maybe you can introduce our speaker tonight. Okay, let's welcome Aaron to introduce Brian. Thank you, Aaron.
Okay. First of all, welcome you all to join us to our section today. So today we have Brian, which is going to give us an open eye sharing to us. And he is the founder of the Young Makers and ChangeMakers. And he is also the founding executive director of LITE at HKU. And yeah, so let's give Brian. Yeah, Brian, let me pass the time to you now.
Yeah, and I want to say Brian is an excellent father as well, and his brilliant son, Zach, has been joining Out of Code, I think in 2014 for a long time. And I know Brian, I did not know he was a lawyer, but I just know he was an excellent father supporting his children to learn coding a long time ago, but I did not know he's so successful in his business and also driving a lot of innovation in Hong Kong U. So I think tonight we are going to learn a lot in the lawyer perspective from Brian. And when you talk about innovation and technology and entrepreneurship, what can we do with it? And I know on Facebook Live, we have a university student with us tonight. Thank you, Brian. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Aaron. And thanks so much for inviting me, Ray, to join as well. Yeah, it's kind of funny. You see me in a particular perspective for such a long time. And I think I will share some of that journey today to perhaps give a broader overview. So I'm really pleased to join the Out of Code webinar series because, you know, I've been part of this journey and part of Ray's journey for the longest of time, and really pleased to be there as well. So maybe to kick it off, what I'll do is I thought I would entitle my presentation "Journey to Foster Inclusive Young Makers and Change Makers in Hong Kong and Beyond." So my journey really started when I had my first child, Zach, who Ray knows well. So really no, this is not Zach, by the way. It started with the question, you know, as a lot of kids are now playing games, you know, is he going to be a digital consumer or a digital creator, right? If you're gonna make games, why don't you? If you're gonna play games, why don't you make games? And if you're gonna make something, why don't you make something that's worthwhile and meaningful and contributes to its society? So this was a statistic that I had read earlier on that really impacted upon me as we think about the future that our children will face, whereby the quote is 65% of today's school children will eventually be employed in jobs that have not yet been created, which is startling if you think about that. Also, the fact is, hence the graphic about the night and day, the issue of digital access. So those who are wealthy enough get access to coding classes and all these opportunities, but what if you don't have access? And what if you live in a country that doesn't have this access? Often, you know, people talk about the 21st century skill sets. And again, if you're lucky enough to go to a good school, you will have the basic foundational literacies. But you know but do they grade you in the competencies like critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity? What about the character qualities of curiosity, grit, adaptability, leadership? Is that in our school curriculum? And is that the job of parents potentially to inculcate some of that? So around that time, the Maker movement was really taking up steam, where President Obama in the US was hosting Maker Fair in the White House, and Li Keqiang was visiting Makerspaces in Shenzhen and the like, and people were talking about the new industrial revolution. That's when I learned about this gentleman, Seymour Papert. Those in the AI space will know him well, but he's also known as the grandfather of Scratch. And he was a great educationalist, and one of his thoughts about the role of the teacher is to create the conditions for invention rather than provide ready-made knowledge. Now, this is particularly true in the Google era, where people, I don't know the answer to something, I'll just Google it. You don't have to remember it. What do you need to do? How do you invent? How do you create things? And so one of Seymour Papert's famous books is called Mindstorms. And in fact, Lego liked it so much, they called the whole series after his book. And this is a summary of some of his big ideas, namely learning by doing, technology as a building material, having hard fun, learning to learn, taking time to do to learn. And you can't do it right without doing it wrong. So trial and iteration, and do unto ourselves as we do it unto our students. In other words, teachers as modeling and models and role models. And finally, we are living in and entering a digital world. So his theory of learning is called constructionism, and it's based on experience and observation. So students learn best by making tangible objects, or they have authentic real-life learning opportunities through a guided and collaborative process, and they have peer feedback. So that inspired me to set up a social enterprise called Young Makers and ChangeMakers. So I describe it as an inclusive platform and community to foster young maker mindsets, STEAM education, and 21st century skills. Inclusive is important because to me, it wasn't just about rich kids having the opportunities. I wanted as many people have the opportunities regardless. And the change maker aspect comes from the concept from Ashoka, which is making positive change to the world. Now, we first started off by setting up, being event-driven, shall we say. So I organized Hong Kong's first MakerCamp. We held it at, so we're asset-light, we have no premises. But we're lucky to have great partners like Cyberport, Cocoon, Maker Bay, and then CityU App Labs, where we hosted one there as well. We were fortunate enough to get good publicity and even in TED, but so some of the people used to ask me, so what age group do I focus on? And I said, if you know the age of my son, you will know the age group that I focus on, right? So that's Zach back then. And one of the great things is I meet really cool people too. So for those that know and recognize, that's young Michael and that's young Aaron there. When I first met them many years ago, and this is what the wonderful community that we have here. So we supported Maker Fair, the official one in Poly U, which again impacts the community with Enable tools, which is 3D printed hands. And in subsequent years, also introduced new tools like Flexo, which is a flexible Lego system there. We expanded and were invited to also participate in Shenzhen Maker Fair. This was a project in relation to laser cutting and in individualized laser cut lanterns. And there we started getting connected with different segments of the maker community, whether it's the bunny who originally became famous by hacking the Xbox, to the CEO of Microbit. And we even invited a team from Renaissance College that we mentored that was creating a smart bottle, IoT. We even were then invited to Fab 12. So Fab 12 is led by MIT, and they lead the Fab Lab initiative around the world. And there we got to meet with international educators in the space, and not to mention MIT, but also then trial and feature new tools like PiTop, which uses a Raspberry Pi connected with a screen, and then we create, Zach created IoT type tools for kids to play with and the like as well. I was then also invited to be a judge at Makeathons in Singapore for Southeast Asia, and so it was really cool to see. Again, this is the change maker aspects. Now these are more university students now who are creating tools for e-waste, for conservation, and interestingly, the winning team was a sonar tool which helps attract rats for disposal of rats in Cambodia. But it was around this time that I really started adding to my thinking around the importance of design thinking. So really being directed in terms of how you create your tool. So you're creating something, but how does it serve a need, and does it serve who you want to serve? So that's where I started creating what I started to call mini young makeathons, where kids were coming together with basic tools to create for a purpose. So one of the first ones was to create my dream smart home using Meta. We started with really low tech. Again, whether it's inspired by the cardboard challenge, we used Make Do and Strawbees to create cardboard arcades. And then we went and combined for higher level tools, again, using Raspberry Pi, Makey Scratch, and 3D Doodler. In this case, it was hosted at PolyU, and the theme was Olympic themed. And up the front here, you can see young Aaron as well, again. Now, at this stage, then I started visiting a lot of a lot of schools to see what they're doing from a maker and STEAM education perspective, both here in Hong Kong as well as in Singapore and in Shenzhen, to see the best practices and to share as well. We introduced some after-school projects too. So in terms of school enrichment, whereby in this case, the theme was to invent to improve your school. And so the students created a library bot and a canteen bot, and these went into various competitions. We also did programs outside of the classroom because at this stage, a lot of schools didn't have makerspaces, so we worked with various makerspaces around the region. And we also work with teacher education, in this case with Teach for Hong Kong, so that the next generation of teachers can be equipped to go into schools. We're quite interested and keen to scale, so we went to do a bit of education curriculum development as well. And you may recall I talked about Fab 12 in Shenzhen. So Fab 13 was in Chile, which I couldn't attend, but I was so pleased when I was watching it live and they featured our project. So our project was a laser cut lantern. So as in the lanterns that we celebrate, laser cut, and it's being used by American schools and schools around the world, our curriculum. You know, increasingly we started connecting with lots of makers around the world, whether it is, you know, the creator of the Arduino or the teacher that inspired the students from a high school to win a first robotics competition against MIT that was in a movie called Spare Parts. So really wonderful community in the maker movement. We also got the chance to go and visit international world-class makerspaces and STEAM educators. So in this case, this was in MIT, and visiting how they approach makers, and of course took the opportunity to visit MIT App Inventor as well, and MIT CSAIL, which is their AI labs there too. But really what we were hoping to do was to have more impact across the board. So the Hour of Code was one of the initiatives that came about, and we actually hosted the second Hour of Code in Hong Kong. In this case, it was in PolyU, and it coincided with the new Star Wars movie. So through contacts, we connected with Disney, and we have a nice video of stormtroopers coming in and surprising everyone during the Hour of Code, which is good fun. We also then collaborated with Google on their Google CS First, and they brought together a lot of the academic connections, whether it's Ray from CityU App Labs to PolyU to HKU at that time. That I had no affiliation at that time, but really but also with industry providers like First Code Academy. So it was to bring the ecosystem together to roll this out across Hong Kong in an inclusive way. But the thing that I think we're kind of most famous for in Hong Kong is our Technovation Girls Make Tech initiative. This ticked a lot of boxes for me because A, it was inclusive, it was girls. It was girls aged 10 to 18 to ideate, to prototype, to create apps using App Inventor, a new platform for me at the time, and then to pitch it. And has been described by one of the prominent IT teachers in Hong Kong as the most difficult competition in Hong Kong because there are 4 components. So we introduced design thinking and community service. Also App Inventor, we were able to identify master trainers to help support the girls. Now remember, this is before Cool Thing. So now with Cool Thing, there are more master trainers in Hong Kong. There are relatively few at that time. We taught the girls presentation skills, and importantly, it was connected learning. So we actually brought the girls to lots of different venues across Hong Kong, led by, say, Commonwealth Bank Infinity Lab, Google, WeWork, and Cyberport, so that they actually got in touch with the industry players, and were very often actually facilitated, that the workshops were facilitated by industry players. In our very first year, our top team made it to the finals, and I was able to get funding from Alibaba Entrepreneurship Fund to fund the top senior team, where the girls visited places like Microsoft, NVIDIA, Google, and our top junior team made it to the finals. They pitched and they won, which is fantastic. So when Hal Abelson, who's the originator of App Inventor and leading the charge at MIT, presented at Learning and Teaching Expo, he actually showcased the girls. The funny thing about this photo is that somebody from the Education Bureau took this photo and sent it to me. Said, "Hey, you're being featured now." This is the part of the disconnection in Hong Kong, because I'm not from education, so I was not fully in the loop in some of these aspects. But because of my connections with industry, for Technovation, from the very beginning, I was able to get support from the Education Bureau, which sent it to all the schools across Hong Kong, as well as the Innovation Technology Bureau. So probably the first time both those bureaus supported the same project. But for us, it was not just the competition. We actually supported the girls through their journey if they wanted to. So a lot of the girls were interested in entrepreneurship, so we supported their pitching at startup weekends, at Rise, visits to LinkedIn, and the like. So in the following years, we slowly grew and tried different things. The next year, our startup, our pitch event actually included girls from Shenzhen who came down to pitch. And this year, everything was virtual. So we had everything virtual. This is my favorite quote from the virtual event, which shows how advanced the girls are now. So the quote was, "We found it hard to extract the JSON for our AI emotion recognizer from a 12-year-old," right? So this is how advanced now some of the projects that are coming through from the girls. Now, I personally have a great interest in space, so I was really glad for Young Maker ChangeMakers to be involved in space-related projects, whether it's to control cameras on the ISS, or to participate in a program called Cubes in Space, where selected projects were actually sent on a NASA rocket into space, and for students to participate in Rocket Fest, held in the US. So besides that, have always been a big support of what our code is doing in terms of kids teaching kids to code, right? So we did that in various contexts, but in particular, I hosted Moonhack, and this one was hosted at CityU, and this was run by Australia's Code Club, where we use Scratch, Microbit, and Python in the class. So this year, I'm actually stuck in Perth, Australia right now. And so I still managed to host a Moonhack this year, this time for a local school here. And that's Zach on the top left, near left there. And so he was the one that hosted the Moonhack session for the primary school kids this year here. In the meantime, some of my girls, are ESF, and they organized the ESF coding conference, and I was invited to be a speaker and a judge there. I was also invited by Microsoft to be a judge for their Imagine Hack, which is part of the Imagine Cup program a few years ago. We'll come back to that shortly. We also then increasingly got involved with other initiatives and were invited by the Geneva Tsinghua initiative to Shenzhen, where they have basically have making for SDGs, addressing the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Again, hitting all the right spots in terms of what Young Maker ChangeMaker represents. And more recently, we organized a AI for SDG workshop as part of Powered by Youth by the charity Kids for Kids. In this case, we use Dialogflow. During this time, Hong Kong was having tremendous typhoons. And so the theme there was humanitarian relief. And so the students created chatbots to address, if you were stuck because of the typhoon, what questions can the chatbot use to address some of your concerns? Now, as Ray mentioned, that's not my day job, all of that, right? My day job, what am I? I'm a lawyer. So I did my first law degree in Australia, and then went to New York and practiced law in New York and then in Silicon Valley during the dot-com boom. And then after the dot-com bust, came back to New York and then was headhunted to join Credit Suisse in Hong Kong, where I covered investment banking for Asia Pacific, doing IPOs and M&A. But I was also co-chair of the charity committee, and managed to help the bank move more from philanthropy into more impact investing. So when I left the bank, I set up ACMI, which was focused on improvements for the financial sector, right, using innovation, as well as Young Maker, ChangeMaker as a social enterprise, which doesn't make any money. In fact, needs to be subsidized by me, shall we say. So, but separately through ACMI, I'm the co-chair of the RegTech committee of the Fintech Association. I'm on the steering committee of the Asia Pacific Legal Innovation Technology Association, working with the legal hackers, assisting with the IEEE in relation to its AI ethics projects and the like. Now, in more recent years, I was also part of Hong Kong U's FinTech MOOC. So the MOOC was Asia's first MOOC on FinTech. And I think it's going to be formally announced very shortly that we've just hit 75,000 learners across the world, right? So really well received as well. And that's me with the founder of edX there. I also then introduced as part of Hong Kong FinTech Week a chatbot learning program using Dialogflow. And this one was kindly hosted by CityU. And in fact, my partner in crime with this was Jürgen, who's the head of AI at HSBC. And so after this program, Jürgen used it to train HSBC employees, and I used it for my SDG program as well. Again, all using Google's Dialogflow. So in 2017, I was invited. In the past, I've been speaking on FinTech, and invited to business schools to scare business school students to say, listen, you want to join investment banking? Think again. AI and ABCD technologies is going to change all of that. Then I got invited to law schools to say, hey, basically similar context. Think again. AI, ABCD technology is going to change the practice of law. And so then I also was involved in organizing events for the Computational Law and Blockchain Festival that was featured in the Stanford Journal of Blockchain Law and Policy. And as I mentioned earlier on the IEEE's initiative regarding ethical design for AI and autonomous systems. But I think what brought myself to the attention again to Hong Kong U and being pulled back into the law was when I organized Global Legal Hackathon in Hong Kong. So when I learned about this, I thought this was a great initiative. And I said, well, so who's organizing it? And nobody was organizing it. So I said, look, if somebody will underwrite it, I will organize it. So I organized it. It was held at Thomson Reuters. Our top team in Hong Kong made it to the finals in New York, and they won. So they developed a web browser chatbot, which allows for an easy access and reading of legislation. And that led to actually the Department of Justice outreaching to us and saying, hey, we'd love to meet the team and to see what they're doing in relation to that. And because of that, then somebody I knew from a long time, Doug Arner at Hong Kong U, said, Brian, we want to launch a new initiative here and would love for you to help lead it. And it really was intriguing for me. So for those who are not, so this is a non-lawyer audience. So to lay out some of the background, in Hong Kong, there are a few problems. So the first one is training of the future legal talent, right? So a few years ago, the Standing Committee for Legal Education had identified that technology has important implications for access to justice, the business of doing law, the skills required for new lawyers, and perhaps the demand for new lawyers as well. And so they recognize that this requires new knowledge and skills as well as a different mindset. So the result, needing to upskill lawyers is increasingly recognized, where McKinsey observed that 22% of legal work could be replaced by 2030. So that's the skill set side. Secondly, startups and social entrepreneur ecosystem is such that while there are various things which are easy in Hong Kong, it's quite expensive, especially from a legal point of view, to set up a company, do a startup. So, what can we do to encourage more startups here in Hong Kong? Third, if you think about the law, how does the law address the new frontier technologies? So the phrase I like to use is ABCD technologies: AI, blockchain, cloud, and data. So if an autonomous vehicle has an accident, who's at fault, right? What should the policies be, right? And so these are things that the law needs to adjust. Similarly, you have more and more these ABCD technologies applying to the law, right? So how does that change the practice of the law and the so-called robo-lawyers potentially coming into play, right? So so traditionally you had law firms, but now there's so-called ALSP, so alternative legal service providers, where these are not law firms anymore, but firms that are providing legal services and increasingly automation and the like that will change the entire environment. The same way that fintechs are changing the financial industry, LawTechs, if you like, could be changing the law industry. So I call the new initiative LITE Lab. LITE stands for Law, Innovation, Technology, and Entrepreneurship. And I added the word lab because we're going to experiment, we're going to do stuff. And I remember a comment that I received from the former dean saying, "Lab? Why is there a lab in law school?" And I had to explain the mindset. So why was it appealing for me to take on the role? Firstly, it's interdisciplinary. So it's led by the law school, but it's in conjunction with the Department of Computer Science and other faculties. So for example, my courses will be introduced as part of the Bachelor of Arts and Science degrees in FinTech and in Design Plus. The FinTech degree is led by Department of Computer Science and the Faculty of Business and Economics. The Design Plus degree is led by Faculty of Architecture. Very interdisciplinary. So as part of the interdisciplinary stuff, so I've been able to then bring more university students to participate in Access to Justice hackathons run by the Law Society. And that's again where I end up meeting with not just law students, but other students from across the university, which I'll get back to shortly. Secondly, it's experiential. So it's not just about learning, the traditional learning of the sage and the stage. I want to do stuff. So here's a interesting example. So at one of the hackathons, I asked the teams to name their own team names, and one of them called themselves ARG, right? And I said, why do you call yourself ARG? They say, oh, well, we're an AI reading group. We meet every week to read AI papers. I'm like, okay, after this hackathon, I have a project for you. So after the hackathon, I said, have you heard of Ducky Town? So Ducky Town is an MIT project whereby, again, for purposes of inclusion, they create little robots using Raspberry Pi. Remember Raspberry Pi that I worked on many years ago, right? And then continuously for young kids, they use Raspberry Pi, but then they use supervised and unsupervised learning for the Raspberry Pi in what they call an AI self-driving Olympiad. And so together with the Department of Computer Science, they formed a team and they went to Canada for the IEEE International Conference on Robotics and Automation, and they won second prize, right? So this was a project introduced by law school to computer science, right? And part of the reason is because of my research in AI and wanting to learn about how we're going to address some of these autonomous driving type questions. Innovation is another area that's of interest to us. So, collaborating with folk at Stanford Codex in terms of what they call legal informatics or computational law, working with the FinTech Week and the different digital banks that are coming through, but then expanding upon the Global Legal Hackathon, which I now brand as Legal RegTech Hack. And while it's a little bit small in the picture there, one of the participants there later on set up a company called Hollow, and this year just won the Imagine Cup. So it's, as I said, lots of circular stories around a lot of these. technology is important for us. So blockchain, for example, in terms of working together with blockchain clubs here in Hong Kong U, I organized Legal RegTech Hack, whereby we did a smart legal contract challenge. So they collaborated with Consensus and used the open law platform to train in and then to develop solutions around smart contracts. In the meantime, contributed chapters to the AI book and the legal tech book as well. Entrepreneurial, we're working with Idendron, which is Hong Kong U's entrepreneurship center, but also with Jumpstarter, with Cyberport, with WHub and the like, and really, encouraging the students to participate in the ecosystem. And we're collaborative. We want to work with a lot of ecosystem members. And again, this is where I come in because of my background in the space. So in our first course called LITE, and it basically is a startup law course, and so it teaches the basics of a startup law that you would need if you're going to start up a company. But we also introduce other elements, right? So for example, business model canvas, so that you understand how a business runs. Legal design thinking, so it ends up being user focused. Computational and algorithmic thinking. Because of the nature of a lot of the students are not computer science students, we went with low code or no code platforms like video explainers, document assembly, and chatbots. Even before COVID, I did blended learning and peer learning with teams. And to me, student agency, motivation, and engagement is really important. Again, all lessons learned from the constructionist approach that I did with the Maker education. So these are some of the projects that the students have made that we will be creating and featuring on our website. The idea being that the projects can then be resources for Hong Kong startup community. And this is a outline of some of the projects that the students have done. A lot of them, and again, I left it completely to them to choose. A lot of them use Vion, which is a video explainer. So they created video animation explainers. So if you want to understand certain aspects of the law, you have an animation to explain it to you. But quite a few of them use Dialogflow, and they integrate it with Slack or with Facebook Messenger. And quite a few of them also tried the different document automation tools that I introduced there. Part of it is also I introduced student competitions. In this case, a competition called Iron Tech Law Invitational from Georgetown University, where the challenge is to create a legal tool, a technology tool for an NGO to provide access to justice. Our top team here created EC Bank, which is an NLP-powered data bank platform to assist NGOs to serve injured workers to get the compensation they deserve. So you're an injured worker, you lost a finger or a hand, how much should you be paid? The insurance company will still give you a certain amount. Is that fair? Is it not fair? This is a database that mines past decisions to give you calculations. So the team actually pitched for the Hong Kong Federation of Youth Groups Innotech Solutions competition, and they won that. And then we were all meant to go to Georgetown in Washington, D.C., but because of COVID, we didn't. They pitched online, and they won. So I've got quite a decent track record, but I consider myself very lucky because it's all a matter of the talent that we have all across Hong Kong. And in fact, one of the participants here was a participant, was not a law student, but a design student. And I met her because she was in the hackathon that I had mentioned, the legal hackathon earlier on as well. So again, it's success and grit reinforcing that. The second course that we had is more experiential, as in terms of LITE Lab. So in that one, the idea is to actually work with startups, and it's inspired by various kind of clinics, they are called in the US, whether it comes from Penn or Berkeley or UC Hastings and the like. And so this semester, of course, everything was online, and I was here in Perth, but running all the classes, and we had project partners who are really 9 startups who the students were actually working on projects. And these are some of the projects that they worked on. So whether it's doing research on metadata, on web scraping of public information, platform liability, blockchain law in China, regulated fintech compliance, or website terms and conditions. The students also created, legal document primers on licensing agreements, distribution agreements, and supply agreements. So this is the level, so again, lawyers need to understand the technology to be able to advise upon it. And similarly, technologists need to understand that the law impacts all these areas. And that's partly what LITE Lab is there to achieve. So we're fortunate enough to have expanding our global influence, having been interviewed by CNBC, featured in a book called Future Proof, but also involved in on AI governance, whereby I represent Hong Kong in those discussions on AI governance. So in terms of a takeaway for this presentation, what I would kind of try to pull it together to call it, inclusive technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship for good. So if you have to have 4 takeaways, perhaps these are the 4. Firstly, there's talent everywhere. We all have different skills to contribute, regardless of our background. So really, so this is what I would call a converted audience. So everybody that's joining this already knows that coding is important. Everybody knows they want to continue with coding. So I don't need to sell you on that. You're the converted there. But I want you to know that you have to understand that there's an interdisciplinary approach that you need to have, and you need to approach it with respect. So if you're a hardcore coder, you're going to have to work with domain experts like lawyers, like doctors, and that know their craft, but they don't know the coding side. So that's how you work together on the product. You need to work with psychologists, anthropologists, linguists, designers, data analysts, and increasingly maybe ethicists as well as you create your products. So you must be willing and able to work. You must have an ability to understand these yourself, and also to work collaboratively and in teams with these people in the real world. And that's why I'm a big fan of project-based learning and working in teams. So secondly, you must learn to love to learn, right? New coding languages, tools, and platforms are being developed every day. So if you're not willing and able to adapt and learn, you will be left behind. And in fact, now these days, there's so many low or no code platforms that they really allow for more inclusive automation and development. And that's a general direction that a lot of coding is going down. So thirdly, so in light of that, that's especially coming from law school and teaching a lot of people. I do have CS students, but I do have a lot of non-CS students. So I need to calibrate what we do with our classes. So thirdly, always share and learn from each other. And that one, I don't have to sell that much to the Hour of Code community. It's a wonderful community that does that a lot. But this is something I think we need to spread the word for, especially for coders around the world. And last but not least, be a maker that that also makes with impact, right? So if you're going to make something that's meaningful, that actually can help the society, and not just make a time waster like candy, crush, right? You have skills, use those skills to make the world a little bit better. With that, hopefully I kept to the time, Ray and Aaron, and I'm very happy to open it up to any questions. Thank you.
Perfect, wonderful sharing, Brian. We learned so much from you tonight. To start with, I think Aaron has prepared a few questions for you. Or if the audience have any questions, we are also checking the Facebook Live. If you have any questions, feel free to voice out.
Yeah, let me ask first. So your son is a boy, and why are you so into the field to grow the female tech talent, Brian?
Great question. And I get that a lot, right? Because people normally assume that, oh, I have daughters, that's why I'm doing this, right? So if you remember the story, right? So Young Maker, ChangeMakers started with inclusion. It was just about inclusion. And frankly, it started with socioeconomic inclusion. So again, my basic premise was I didn't want just rich kids to have access, right? Because at that time, again, before Hour of Code and the like, computer coding classes were expensive, right? So, and maker education was, you know, this American thing, right? So if you were lucky enough to go to a, you know, an international school that had that exposure, that's great. But, you know, the idea is to actually be inclusive. So how do you make sure that even if you are rich or poor, can you do it? And that's why this is social enterprise, because we don't really charge, right? So like out of code, right? We want as many people to get access to this as possible. So it started with socioeconomic, right? It started with inclusive of, so you'll note some of them include, you know, whether people have physical impairments, or whether people have, so open source is a great area of interest, because we want to be and in fact, you know, for example, the hour of code that we organized, you know, that was in together with Kids for Kids, and it was with Sir Ellis Kaduri School. So part of it was we were extending to ethnic minorities in Hong Kong. So really my inclusion was across the board inclusion. It just happens that Technovation was girls, right? So in some ways, a lot of people that don't know me as well say, oh yeah, Brian, he's like the girls' rights guy, right? And I'm all in favor for girls, of course, getting inclusion. And you know, some people say that's a first world, it's a US problem. We don't have that problem. I've been told by some senior people in Hong Kong, we don't have that problem in Hong Kong. The girls do better than the boys, right? So whereas, you know, to me, it's just a matter of inclusion. So I would be provocative, Aaron, and to ask you, so if you look at your hour of code classes, how many are girls? What percentage are girls? Right? So to me, it's about inclusion and telling and encouraging people, whether they're girls, whether they're boys, whether they're ethnic minority, whether they're rich, whether they're poor, doesn't matter. All of this should be accessible to you because it's your future. And you know, we, you know, if you are going to be one of those that are going to be in jobs that haven't been created yet, we want to be able to give you the support to be ready for that.
Got it. Thank you, Brian. Yeah. Any further questions? We see that there are more and more people in the Zoom session now. Yeah, and we also have Eugene. We saw you as a university student, a CS student. I think you have learned a lot tonight. Any questions from our audience?
Yeah, there's a question in the chat room.
Oh, chat room. I think Michael, you have a question, right? Michael. Okay, maybe I start with one question. So since I'm working in a university, I know how difficult it is to push some program. So how do you manage to get this to work in Hong Kong U? It seems that you are getting so many different departments to come to support your program. And it seems like you are transforming a lot inside Hong Kong U. And maybe you can share how you resolve that for us.
Thank you for the question. So I will say two things about that. So number one is I consider myself lucky. So when I was engaged to set up LITE, for me, what, as I said, interested me was it was interdisciplinary, right? But at that time, I did not know about the BASC program, right? So on the one hand, this was all set up before I joined the BASC program. So which is great, right? But as some of you who are at universities will know, a lot of it, and in life as well, it's about personal relationships, right? So even though the faculties may have agreed, it can only work if you have the personal relationships, right? Like Dr. Ray and I, we've known each other for many years, and that's why I'm lucky to have friends like that, you know, when I wanted to host things, I call up, right? Hey, does CityU have any space? Hey, does PolyU have any space? Hey, and even Hong Kong U. So Hong Kong U hosted our Technovation boot camps even before I joined Hong Kong U, because I called Kit, hey, does Hong Kong U have any space? So if you have the relationships, it works. So when I first joined Hong Kong U, if you know the layout, the law school has wonderful new campus and facilities in Centennial building, but it's way over on the eastern side, right? So I spent a lot of time at the Starbucks right in the middle, because that's where I would meet faculty members from the other faculties, right? I would have lots of Starbucks sitting there and meet with a lot of the, you know, members of computer science and say, great, so who's your AI person? Can you introduce me to him? Who's your blockchain person? Can you introduce me to him or her, right? So similarly, and that's how I slowly end up working. And part of it is showing credibility too. I mean, ironically, I've been invited to speak at blockchain events at CTU, and I'm the only non-computer science person, right? So part of it is then the ability to communicate and the credibility to be willing and able to do it and to show a track record for that. And to be honest, that's tenacity too, because within the university, the other thing I've learned is that some people, some people are more interested in research than teaching, right? B, some people, interdisciplinary is hard, right? Because you don't get the journal recognition. It's hard to get the credits across faculty sometimes. So whereas for somebody like me, I'm not a career academic. So I go in, my approach is I come in as an outsider. I'm going in to learn. I'm going in to connect from industry, but also hopefully credibly within the faculties. And I'm lucky to have a degree of success. Trust me, there are people that they are not interested, right? Interdisciplinary is not easy, but if you're lucky enough to find the right people with the right support and to identify the right stakeholders who are similarly interested, then you start with small programs and you slowly grow from there. The other thing I would add that I've been quite lucky about is and some people have mentioned this too. So this year I have 2 programs, two courses. Next year I'm introducing at least another 3 or 4 courses. And I'm lucky enough to do that as well, right? So one of them is LITE. So the LITE lab that I organized, we're doing it now for postgraduate. We're also organizing a social impact entrepreneurship course. So really focuses not less on the tech startups, but more on the NGO and social enterprise space, and working with social enterprises and NGOs. We're also organizing a LawTech and RegTech sandbox, is what I call it. So we'll be trying out new technologies within that. And we're also introducing an internship. So this is interesting because this will be a 4 credit. All of these are 4 credit. And so it's a benefit to the industry because they get the free labor, but importantly, it's graded as well, right? So we, on our side as professors, we need to ensure that the students have a good learning experience, that and learning outcomes are achieved through that, but by the same token, ensure that the startups or the NGOs or social enterprises get the value that they would hope from the program as well. So all very exciting, but I've been quite lucky to have submitted and gotten most of them approved as well. So I think hopefully some of it is track record, some of it is timing, because I'm in the fintech space, which is a little bit sexy. I'm in the LawTech space, which is a little bit sexy. So I'm fortunate enough to have good stakeholders who so far believe in what we do, but hopefully it is also because we're also delivering.
Okay. Any question from our audience?
Yeah.
Yeah, since we only have 10 more minutes, I think we can take maybe 3 to 4 more questions. Yeah. Aaron, you have questions, right?
No, it's a question from the chat room. So a person called Lee, it is he or she is asking, any suggested blockchain project suitable for secondary school students?
Wow. If Lee can drop me a line, I might have to get back to you on that, right? So it really depends on what your level of background is in blockchain. Blockchain, number one, can be complicated, but it really depends on what protocol that you're using and what it is that is of interest to you. So for example, I come from Fintech and LawTech. There are lots of blockchain projects in the Fintech space that deal with immutability, for trade finance, for digital identity and the like. But if you're a secondary school student, this might not be very interesting to you, right? I'm about, so what is interesting to you? some things that some projects that maybe you may be able to relate to and might be of interest may relate to being able to trace, say for example, you are interested in organic food, right, or sourcing of food, and you want to make sure that that food, even though it comes from the place that they brand and say it comes from, there are processes that can be and projects that address that. So maybe start with what you are interested in and the kind of projects there. The second issue is protocols. There's so many different protocols, right? So Ethereum is a well-known platform and protocol that a lot of people are using, but some may argue is on the downturn, and there are lots of competing protocols as well. So that comes back to my later point about this. So, you know, be willing to learn lots of different things. So maybe if Lee, you want to drop me a line, as I said, and I'm contactable via the Facebook page, or I'm sure Dr. Ray has got my details as well. I'm happy to share that. But maybe if you give me a bit more background, I can have more ideas for you.
Yeah, we are in the Zoom chat room. Feel free to send message to Brian directly. So I have a question for you, Brian. Today is the DSE announcement day. We know law major is still very popular. A lot of top students, they are like applying to this school. When you see Hong Kong U is transforming, do you see like another university in Hong Kong also doing something similar, or do you see other part of the world like we are now in Australia? What do you see that kind of landscape for the intake student? Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Ray. So when you say landscape for the intake students, from the student perspective or from the school perspective?
From the student perspective. So when they want to apply for like some major, because maybe I'm not in a good position to advise this during few days, but I think you as your career is in this sector for a long time. I think a student, they want to hear from your opinion. Yeah.
Sure. So let me share some thoughts off the top of my head. So number one, so law is for better for worse, perceived to be high prestige role, right? And again, if you go to high echelons, you can make quite a bit of money. Thank you very much, right? And I've been lucky enough to have worked with, you know, I used to work in large law firms, right? Some of the largest law firms in Australia. Now, you know, it's King & Wood Mallesons. That's where I started work, and then Sullivan Cromwell, and then also with big banks, right? And that was in a law capacity. So if you want to work at the high-end advisory law, but law is changing also, as we've discussed and you mentioned, in terms of technology and how it evolves. And then for better for worse, and I generally like to think for better, Hong Kong U law faculty is actually very highly ranked globally. So it's a high prestige place. So students that come here, I shouldn't say pleasantly surprised, but I mean, some of them are really bright kids. They're really bright, okay? So, and they're really hardworking. So I'm lucky because I have bright and hardworking students already, right? So now, what is it they want? A lot of them just want to go to what I did when I grew up, traditional big law firm, get good training, earn big bucks, all good, right? And if you can do that, and that's what you want to do, fantastic. And so the higher ranked schools will always provide that, because the large law firms will always go to these schools to hire good people, right? I mean, they go to lots of other schools, but if you come from a good school, they always good grades, good people. But increasingly, the profession is changing. And so I think, and a lot of law schools are appreciating this. And so that's why if I were a law student, I want to make sure I choose a school that also does have elements that help prepare me, not just for practice of law in the next 10 years, but the next 20 or the next 30, right? And that's where, because of the rate of change, I think that's where I'm lucky enough, and that's why I was hired to actually help put Hong Kong U in for me in the same caliber as some of the best around the world. I calibrate with the best around the world, right? In terms of who's doing what in legal tech around the world. So the US is very strong, and there's some schools very strong in this. Some what I would call traditionally strong law schools have been as good at this. So for example, the West Coast, Stanfords and Berkeleys and the like. Some, not necessarily the highest ranked schools in the US, are doing more legal tech, and that's how they get more famous, right? And so those schools are willing and able to, and have developed some wonderful faculty and curriculum where that's concerned. And then there are some, and then there are lots that are kind of catching up, to be honest. In Hong Kong, I think, dare I say it, Hong Kong U is one of the first to come into this. It will not be the last. I mean, CityU has got CUHK has got initiatives. That, for those that don't know, there are 3 law schools here in Hong Kong. CUHK has got initiatives, and again, and I'm sure CityU does as well. So because each of the schools have got new deans, right? So, and this is one of the hot topics. That being said, we're in a world whereby in China, Tsinghua is leading the charge on computational law. And so in China, where there are virtual courts there that recognize blockchain, it's one of the cutting edge issues. SMU has just introduced a combined degree in between the Department of Computer Science and Law. So it's a computational law degree. I don't have the exact name, but no, it's much more technical, right? And so as a core component to the degree. So there are lots of interesting developments around the world where this is concerned. So I think in the COVID era, we hear different things about where students are willing to go, right? Anecdotally, one of the things we hear, so for example, I'm sure it's the same with you, Dr. Ray, there are not going to be any exchange students this year, right? So there are going to be more local Hong Kong students coming through. So one anecdote as well, so our top students that might otherwise go to international universities might now also come, in addition, come to Hong Kong U, right, for the law schools. And similarly, although current circumstances are still put in question mark in terms of a lot of mainland students as well, right? So it'll be quite interesting how that evolves over the coming years, especially in light of COVID.
Got it. Very, very important opinion. So we have Lee. Any suggestion? Oh, that's question already Aaron answered. I think we can take one last question. Anybody want to go ahead? Maybe it's my turn again to do a quick conclusion. I think, Brian, thanks for your excellent journey. You've been doing so much for Hong Kong people over the years. I just can't, how many events you've been organizing over the years is amazing. So my last question for you is, you've been achieving so much. So what's your like a next destination? Are you planning to recruit more talent from Hong Kong U to your company, or you want to focus on the like K-12 sector, or where are you heading to? So I think this is something we would like to learn from you.
Wow. Great question. I thought I'd land on this page because there's a cute little Aaron, a cute little Michael there. Yeah. So for me, I entering academia is new for me, and it's been actually quite eye-opening. And I'm enjoying a lot of that flexibility, to be honest, and engaging with the university students. So as you said, it was interesting. So I came from the professions, and part of ACMI, we actually did, what you would call executive education. So, so we did training for investment bankers and for lawyers and the like, right? So then on the side, I also did Young Maker, ChangeMaker, which is K-12, right? So, and again, the difficulty or the challenge there, at least for young makers, was the funding model, to be honest, right? Because again, we organize, but because I want to do it inclusive, so if I want to charge, it's one thing. But if I don't charge, it needs to be paid somehow, right? So there's a funding model issue there. So the journey right now I'm embarking on includes the sector in between K-12 and professional, which is university. So far I'm and really in some ways of ed tech, right? So it's been interesting. I've been a big proponent of technology, as you can imagine, and some of us have been, of course, proponents of ed tech. But COVID has really taught us some of the pros, but some of the cons of ed tech as well, right? It can work relatively well if the professors are willing and able to try and engage in new modalities for university level, but for high school level. And Aaron, I think you were you went to boarding school, right? But so now I guess you're not, you'll be probably online learning as well in the coming semester, or is your semester started already?
All online.
Aaron?
Yeah, Aaron, your online
All
school.
online, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
at least procedure, yes.
Yes, and so and again, Ray, you would know, coming from the professor perspective, at Hong Kong U, there are all these programs to teach the professors how to teach online, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
there's a way to do it, right? The traditional professor might otherwise be the sage on the stage. I read the same lecture every time. It could be pre-recorded, frankly, right? And then I close it, and then that's it, right? So, but with us in Makers, right? We want engagement. We want to facilitate. We want to encourage the kids. We want to be there. So it's not all pre-packaged. And so in that way, that transition has been easier for me because I use a lot of that terminology. And it was interesting. I gave a presentation to law university educators on innovations in legal education. And one of the comments that was, and he posted it on his blog actually, he said he observed that a lot of the pedagogies I'm using actually comes from K-12 pedagogies, right? And so I think at least for now, I'm enjoying the academic freedom and the latitude and the challenge of really training the young mind. So as you can see, so now Zach's 14, so still a little bit more to go, but not that far for university too, right? But as you know, with your students, sorry?
Time flies really fast. Yeah.
Exactly. But as you know, with your students, and that's why I keep this page for little Aaron there, right? You guys and your students, they're doing so much more advanced stuff now, right? So if you can, and the technologies are changing, they're being more accessible with low and no code and the like. So I think it's a really fascinating time to look at the future of education, the future of future skills, or upskills, if you like, right? Because we and talent development. So a few things. One, fintech and LawTech has meant that these traditionally, and even now telemedicine, right, with COVID, right? All of these highly regarded professions, they're all knowledge-based professions. What is AI good at? Knowledge, right? and accessing knowledge. So how will these professions change? So whether you're upskilling or reskilling people in banks or in law firms or in hospitals, or you are skilling the next generation of, and what is the Bill Gates quote? You don't need banks, you just need banking services. And the quote I just saw recently was, you don't need lawyers, you just need legal services, right? So how do you how do you train the next generation? Because the students that are coming up don't just have 10 years to the career, they have 20, 30, 40, right? As they live longer, they have to work longer, right? If they have jobs, right? Because of AI, which is another big issue. So I think it's at a very interesting position of trying to cast the net in terms of the direction in which the technologies will roll, the impact on jobs and lives and livelihoods will be, and hopefully channeling it in an appropriate way. So for example, a lot of what I'm doing these days is on AI governance and ethics. So as you develop these technologies, are you thinking of the ramifications, right? So the phrase used is that I like is an unfortunate acronym called FAT, right? FAT, fairness, accountability, and transparency. So is your AI algorithm fair, right? Does it is there unconscious bias, and does it discriminate, right? Whether it's women, age, ethnic minorities, races, is it accountable? So if something goes wrong, who's to blame, right? And if it's a self-learning unsupervised model, who's gonna be responsible for that, right? And who do you sue? Who do you put in jail, right? And then transparency. How do you know how the algorithms work, right? So we need to design systems that can address each of these things if we want us to still remain the masters of the machine, as opposed to the machine to be masters of us and our lives. So I think it's a fascinating space.
Absolutely, totally agree with you. Due to the time, I think we need to end the session now, but I think Aaron will do the closing. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ray. So thank you all for joining us today, and thank you very much, Brian, for your great sharing. And so we are going to have our hour of code on Saturday.
Yeah, another like a finance industry leader going to share with us his insights.
Yeah. So
if you want to enjoy the video again, please go to our Out of Code YouTube channel for more details. Once again, thank you, Brian and everybody. Well done, Aaron, for your moderation. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks, Aaron. Great to see you all again.
Same. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.